This evening we begin our, as we do on any evening that we have public hearings, we don't begin with a council meeting. Public hearings are quite separate from council meetings. And the purpose of a public hearing, of course, is to give our staff an opportunity to present to the council, because this has already come through Planning Advisory Committee, upon which many councillors are members. And so staff presents a hearing item to us, and then we have an opportunity to ask staff any questions of clarification. If some councillor has a question that hasn't been quite explained for their understanding on that particular item, and then after that takes place, council's function, those councillors you see here this evening, their function is simply to hear representations from the public on that particular item, and followed by any representations that the applicant may have. And then we adjourn the hearing once everyone has had an opportunity to be heard on that particular item. And then this evening I see we have two. So we'll adjourn the first, and then the whole procedure will take place with regard to the second, which we then adjourn, and then we proceed to have our council session, at which time these matters will come up for debate. So there is no debate from council during the public hearing. They are simply here to hear representations from each of the individuals who wish to present. So with that in mind, the other thing that you should know, that the public should know, is that if a councillor is not present at this table during a public hearing, then they're disqualified from voting on the issue at the meeting of council itself, because they haven't had an opportunity to hear the public input with regard to the application. So only those councillors that you see here this evening, even if some come later, only those you see now will be voting on or debating even the issue. So I'll formally call the public hearing to order for Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023. And I think for the purposes of the record, because I know that some councillors are not here for the hearing, we'll take a formal roll call so that it's on the record as to what councillors are here. So if we could do that now. And once again, for the public, it takes about 10 seconds for the system to respond to the votes that take place, and the same applies for what we've just done regarding roll call. And you'll see from the roll call on the screen that two councillors are absent, Councillor Granger and Councillor Killam. They're both absent with good excuses. They could not be here, but as I said earlier, they will not, even though they had good excuses for not being here, they will not be entitled to debate or vote on the issues when they come before council. So, starting off with application 1 under 1A of the agenda. It's an application to rezone a property at 2853 Lovett Road, Coldbrook, and Mr. Mark Fredericks is going to present on behalf of planning. And Mr. Fredericks, when you're ready, sir, I'll just get your presentation light on here. Doesn't seem to want to respond to me. There you go.
There it is. Wonderful, thank you, and good evening, everyone. We've got a planning application here from Bruce Beaton. Mr. Beaton is in the audience with us today. He's requested to rezone a property in Coldbrook from the R2 zone to the R3 zone. This is primarily to legalize the existing building, which is currently rented as 3 separate units. So the property is currently in the residential 1 and 2 unit zone. There's an existing building there, fairly large, and certainly has enough room to be three units. However, the R2 zone does not permit 3-unit dwellings. It only permits 1 or 2 unit dwellings. And so the proposed R3 zone would enable a legalization of this building and enable some upgrades and some building maintenance to occur with permits and bring the building up closer to code compliance. It's worth noting that the proposed R3 zone would legalize the 3 units, but it would also cap this property at 3 units. If it were a larger property, it would be eligible for more than 3 units, but due to its lot area, it would be capped at 3 units. So the applicants own the property since about 2006. It's been rented as a 3-unit building for many years without any community issue. And the lot area, again, is 6,600 square feet. And we need 2,000 square feet per unit in the R3 zone. So due to this lot area, there isn't a opportunity to put any more than 3 units in here. The property has about 75 feet of road frontage. It's got 2 driveways on either side of the building and a detached garage. It's located on a main road, Lovett Road in Coldbrook, but near the end of Lovett Road, where it's quite close to Highway 1. And as a result, it's got access to a variety of commercial opportunities and industrial and residential uses around it. It has great access to the Harvest Moon Trail directly across the street. It's got central sewer and sidewalks and King's Transit access and all of the amenities that come along with urban growth center development. This is the zoning map. It shows the property in red here, and you can see it's in the R2 zone, as is much of this stretch of Lovett Road. But across the street is sort of where this rail trail comes through, and there's campground and a former golf course, driving range in this green P1 zone. And there's a variety of commercial uses in the C1 area here. There's a bakery and a pizza shop, I think, and a used car dealership here at the end. So a fairly mixed area, which is relevant to the R3 zone placement policies. This air photo map highlights some of that. This is the existing building on the property. There are residential dwellings on either side of it. Many of these dwellings are 1 or 2 units themselves. Behind this property is a property of grouped dwellings, all 2 units as well. And again, to the south, you can see this Harvest Moon Trail is coming through the forested area here, and the car dealership and pizza shop are shown here as well. So it's very close to Highway 1, and in that way, very close to kind of a lot of those services. We sent letters to property owners in the area and didn't get any feedback or concerns. And again, that supports this, the indication, or indicates that this building, while it has been rented for as 3 units for many years, that hasn't caused any kind of problem. So the planning strategy allows council to consider amendments from one zone to any other zone, provided it's in the same designation. And in this case, we're talking about a residential designation. There are also commercial designations or industrial, but in this case, we're talking about a property within the residential designation, and it can be rezoned to another zone that's enabled within the residential designation. So going from the R2 zone, we could pick any other residential zone and consider a rezoning application. In this case, we've got a request to go from R2 to R3, and this is the policy that we are able to point to. The following criteria here are not really relevant to this application. These deal with when we deal with a property that's adjacent to a designation. And the final one is when we are dealing with the expansion of a growth center and removal of lands from the agricultural zone. So these don't apply, but what's relevant here is this first part, which allows council to consider rezonings from one residential zone to another type of residential zone. And with every rezoning type of application, we also review these criteria, looking at the kind of zone placement policies and the impact of the specific development and other possible uses that might be permitted in the new zone. And the zone placement policies here are supported. It's a fairly major road. The R3 zone seeks to find lands that are on major transportation routes and close to services. And that's a fair description of this property. And the impact of the possible uses that may be permitted in the R3 zone We just talked about earlier where, because the lot area is capping this property at 3 units, there would be no more impactful uses enabled in the R3 zone than the R2 zone. And the final criteria here is the general criteria for amending the land use bylaw and for development agreements. And that set of criteria is reviewed in more detail in the planning report. But in general, these look at the overall intent of the planning strategy, where we want to see residential development, where we want to see multi-unit buildings, and much of that's supported by policy to guide that type of development into growth centers on major roads near transit services. And we also look at financial impact on the municipality. In this case, there's minimal. We look at feasibility of services, and these are already existing. We look at land use compatibility. This is always the most interesting one, I think. But because we've had no reports of issues with this 3-unit building, we're not expecting any kind of compatibility issues with the surrounding neighborhood. It's generally a residential neighborhood of a mixture of 1 and 2-unit buildings, and so a 3-unit building would not be totally out of place there. It's a fairly compatible land use. There aren't any designated well field areas in this location, and it's certainly a suitable site. It's been a 3-unit building for a long time, and having been on the property, it certainly feels as though it can accommodate 3 units. One thing we look at when we do rezonings that are seeking to legalize an existing building is just to verify that the property has the ability to meet the new zone's requirements, these being parking requirements, setback requirements, road frontage, lot area, and so on. And this property can meet all of those criteria. They can meet all of the kind of zone requirements of the R3 zone, with the exception of the front yard setback. This building predates the municipality's land use bylaws. It was built many, many years ago, and it hangs into the road right-of-way by about a foot. So the front foot of this building hangs into the road right-of-way. And so in that sense, it can't meet the front yard setback of either the R2 zone or the R3 zone. But our development officers looked at this and confirmed it's a legal situation, and the building can be occupied and used and even expanded if necessary or if desired, so long as it's not further encroaching into the front yard. Now, because it's into the road right-of-way, we did consult, we always consult with the Department of Transportation, or Department of Public Works, I'm sorry, about road access and traffic generation and so on. And we asked them specifically about this issue as well, but they had no concerns with the house. Certainly it's within the road right-of-way, but it's not within the kind of paved roadway, if you will. The right-of-way is obviously much wider than the paved lanes of the road. So it doesn't actually look like it's in the road right-of-way, and it doesn't even function that way either. You could even park a car in front of this and still be well out of the travel lanes of Lovett Road. So an interesting issue. It's an old building and it predates our requirements, and so this is a situation that is not totally unique to this building. Other buildings do this in the county. We went through this process. We didn't hold a public information meeting for this because the property is under 1 acre in size, and it's not required for those types of properties. We sent letters to some of the property owners within 500 feet, and those same property owners were notified of this public hearing as well. There were no written submissions received. All statutory requirements have been met, and with that I would pass it back to the mayor for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fredericks. Is there any question or clarification arising from any councillor? No, I see none. Does anyone from the public wish to comment on this application? Yes, sir. If you wouldn't mind coming to the mic. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that you're going to have a hard time getting here. You played football all that time, and you never got in this situation before, right?
No, it's all good. It's not a hard time. I just wanted to provide a little context. There's basically it's a simple old building. I think it was one of those old mail kind of general store kind of places, close to the road, little community, nice apartment upstairs. And so basically it's got a big wall in the middle, And it always had these 2 units that are like, you know, maybe 500 square feet. So there's a couple of seniors living in them that grew up in Coldbrook, worked at Scotian Gold, and I kind of got a soft spot for people like that, because it's kind of hard when when your body starts to give out a little. It's hard if you don't have a big pension or a lot of money put away to just find a simple ground floor place to live and that fits within your budget. So you can vote no to this and it won't impact me very much. I mean, their rents are like $600 or maybe $625 a month, everything in kind of thing. But I hope you see the human side of it. And they're great tenants, they're great people, they're quiet, they'd probably be there 25 years. We get the zoning changed, then we can go in there and make sure it's safe and, you know, take care of a few of those types of renovations. And so I appreciate you considering this, and I look forward to hearing your verdict, and I hope you have a happy New Year. Thanks.
Thank you. If you just stay in your place, you open yourself up for questions of clarification, if there are any. There are none. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much.
I neglected to ask Mr. Beaton to identify himself and his address, but he is the applicant in the matter. Is there any other member of the public who wishes to comment on this application? Seeing none, then I'll declare the public hearing regarding Mr. Beaton's application to be closed, and the issue will be considered and debated at council itself. And now we'll move on to item B, which is an application to enter into a development agreement at 536 Sunken Lake Road, Sunken Lake. And Mr. Fredericks has this file again. Mr. Fredericks, as soon as you're ready, sir.
Thanks very much. There's another planning application, this time not for a rezoning, but for a development agreement, where we have a bit more control over some of the development regulations that apply to a specific property. Here we've got a property in Sunken Lake Road. A representative of the owner. The owner is Kenzel Properties, and Chesley Long is the applicant, who's a representative of that business. Chesley Long, I would acknowledge, is also in the audience with us this evening. And Chesley's requested the opportunity to build a group of tourist cabins on this property through a development agreement. So Chesley Long, who works for Kenzel Properties, has applied for a development agreement to permit up to 20 tourist cabins on the property known as 536 Sunken Lake Road. And these tourist cabins may range in size and type. They may be geodesic domes or tunnel tents, sort of shown here. And some of them may be relatively small teardrop style units like shown here. Some background, Kenzel Properties Limited has owned this particular property for many years. They also own the majority of the land around Sunken Lake. Some of the other properties are land lease arrangements where Kenzel Properties owns the land and has a land lease arrangement with the home and cottage owners there. But specifically with this property, they've owned it for many, many years. It was once used as a kind of campground and lake access many years ago. The property is mostly forested, but there are a couple of buildings that would be repurposed. They haven't been used in a number of years, but they're intended to be repurposed. It's about a 5-acre property with around 200 feet of road frontage and 500 feet of lake frontage, and it's zoned lakeshore residential. The surrounding community within Sunken Lake includes a variety of residential development. There's a nonprofit scouts camp just to the north of this property, and a variety of homes and cottages around Sunken Lake. This air photo shows the property in red. This is the scouts camp just above here, and the long road is a kind of named driveway that is intended to circle this property and also continue to provide access to the scouts camp. You can see it's mostly forested property though, and it's intended that as many trees would remain as possible. This is a zoning map of the same area. Most of the area around our lakes is either in the S1 or S2 zone. This lake is within the S1 or Lakeshore Residential, which does allow for residential development, and lots can be subdivided and homes or cottages can be built as of right. These shoreland areas are also eligible for development agreements like what we're considering here today. The P1, though, this green area is a commercial recreation zone, and this applies to the Scouts camp. This is a site plan that shows the kind of potential layout of tourist cabins. This went through various renditions before kind of ending up on this scenario. Again, some of these cabins may be different types. Again, some of those tunnel tents, some may be teardrop style. And it's intended that the driveway here, this sort of loop, would utilize the existing roadway that's on the property now. And what's unique about this final site plan that we accomplished was we've pushed all of the development back 100 feet from the lake shore, again, to provide some buffering and some noise protection and so on. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But this is a site plan of the property, and it kind of gives a sense of what they envision to build here. This planning application generated quite a lot of public interest. We held a public information meeting in the spring of last year and sent letters and placed a newspaper ad. And those resulted in a significant amount of public feedback. Much of that was concerns around noise, concerns around the potential visual impact, some of the side effects that may come with having more activity on a fairly small lake, and there were also water quality concerns. There was a template letter, I believe initiated by Mr. Boats, Matthew Boats, who is in the audience with us as well. And this letter was signed by approximately 31 separate individuals. Those individuals were seeking some level of anonymity due to this kind of land lease arrangement that's common around Sunken Lake. So where Kenzel Properties owns the subject property that we're talking about here, they also own many of these other properties. And so there was a request made by some of those home and cottage owners who lease land from Kenzel to just keep their names out of the public record. And so that letter is within the planning report as well. And there were a lot of concerns heard, certainly. One of them was certainly noise. That came up a lot. Sunken Lake is a fairly small lake, one of the smaller ones in the county. And some of the residents we spoke with described being able to hear conversations across the lake. If they were out in their yard, they could hear someone across the lake having a conversation with someone on their property. And so there was obviously a concern that this proposal may introduce even more noise that would be able to be heard around the lake. And the feedback, so a lot of concerns here. Both the increased activity, water quality, both from the increased activity, but also potential runoff concerns into the water. So a lot of concerns ranging from those sorts of perspectives were heard, and that feedback was taken pretty seriously. Staff met with the applicant a number of times to discuss how could we respond to these kind of concerns. And we negotiated reducing the total number of cabins down and a larger setback and some fairly strict vegetation requirements as well. So the changes that we made after hearing from the public was to increase the shoreland setback or shore setback from the lake to the development is of a minimum of 100 feet, is much deeper than normal lakeshore residential zone requirements of 65 feet. So we've increased that setback fairly significantly and required a lot of vegetation be planted in there and be maintained. And those were efforts that were made to hopefully address those concerns, hopefully reduce the noise, and hopefully reduce the visual impact as well. So staff worked with the applicant on that, and we reduced the total number of units as well. The original application was for 25 cabins, and the current development agreement before council today enables up to 20 units. So the planning strategy guides us in this kind of analysis, and just want to highlight a couple of objectives that support this kind of development. Within the shoreland designation, one of the objectives is to provide opportunities for tourism development and to provide opportunities for outdoor recreation. And both of those can be achieved by providing tourist cabins in a kind of a lakeside setting. And the MPS continues to outline some more specific tourism policies shown here. 2.5.11 enables us to sort of permit a variety of opportunities for visitor-oriented businesses, certainly throughout the municipality, but specifically the shoreland area. So these kind of tourism and shoreland objectives and policies point us towards, this supporting visitor-oriented businesses in general, or at least being open to considering those. And I think the intent around that is largely to provide the opportunity for people to enjoy a lakeside retreat. Not everyone has the privilege of owning a lakeside home or cottage, and so being able to provide rental opportunities is an opportunity to allow for that, and to enable people to have that wonderful experience of waking up next to a lake, which is a pretty special thing. And these sort of tourism and outdoor recreational kind of goals help to support that. The planning strategy has an enabling policy that allows council to consider this specific type of development agreement. And in evaluating these types of development agreements, council just verifies that the proposal is oriented towards visitors or the traveling public and may include lodging. And that's what we're talking about in this case. The subject property has a lot area that can appropriately accommodate the proposed use, accessory uses, structures, and parking areas, and infrastructure. And staff are pretty confident that because the type of tourist cabins that we're talking about here are fairly small, that the 5-acre property is an appropriate size for that. Many of these cabins could be clustered together, and many of them do not require a large land area. Most of them are built on wooden platforms and don't require a tremendous amount of land area. The enabling policy continues for a few slides here, so bear with me. Criteria C is that the site facilities are adequately buffered or separated from residential dwellings. And again, this is intended to help mitigate the visual impacts that may come from a kind of commercial operation. And we feel like we've achieved this with a fairly significant buffer from the lake with a 100-foot setback and some vegetation requirements. So I feel like we've achieved that. And D, if the proposal is for a lot located on a lake, which in this case we are located on a lake, council shall be satisfied that the use is directly related to lakeshore activities. And in this case, certainly a tourist accommodation on a lake would certainly be directly related to the lake, and certainly may include swimming or other nature kind of experiences. So a few sort of sub-criteria here. Providing access off a public road, and we've achieved that with Sunken Lake Road as a public road owned and maintained by the province. Again, the lot is an adequate size to ensure the buffering between the uses and the neighboring properties, and we feel like we've probably achieved that with this large wooded setback. Access on the parcel up to the lakefront. This is regarding back lots, so this criteria doesn't really apply here. So we're not talking about a back lot. That would be a lot on the other side of a road. But we're dealing with a kind of lakeside lot here. And the proposal will not negatively impact lake health. This was this is something that came up a lot, certainly through the public consultation. And staff are aware that that's a pretty important factor. We run a 20-plus year lake monitoring program through the planning department, and we recognize the importance of maintaining that lake water quality, and aimed to protect that through the 100-foot setback where vegetation is required to help absorb any kind of potential runoff or nutrients before any water entered the lake. So we're fairly confident that we can achieve that through careful design regulations. So one is that large setback and a lot of vegetation. Another is a kind of designed drainage system and filtering of any surface drainage. And we also look at parking and surfaces as well. So one of the requirements within this development agreement is to minimize the total number of parking spaces, which essentially offers more tree canopy cover. Sunken Lake, it's worth acknowledging, is one of the smaller lakes in the county, and there was a reported algal bloom this summer, in the summer of 2022. And these blooms are complex, and they may be influenced by warmer, longer summers, leading to warmer water temperatures, which is where algal blooms can occur in warm water. However, development can also play a factor in that. Certainly, lawn fertilizers or poor or failing septic systems can also contribute to algal blooms. And algal blooms are really what we want to avoid when we're talking about water quality, lake water quality. We want to avoid algal blooms. So everything we can do to mitigate that, we want to try to do. So, we want to see well-buffered development that's not entering into that riparian area. So staff are confident that the design of that 100-foot setback helps to achieve a protection of the lake water quality. We also have an engineer's letter that's signing off on lake impact, signing off on the fact that they don't expect any kind of impact on the lake water quality. The last criteria here is, again, just pointing towards that vegetation. If the proposal's on a lake shore, native vegetation, particularly on the lands closest to the water's edge, is preserved and restored as much as possible, and certainly we tried to achieve that within the development agreement. Also, the proposal is designed to reduce, slow, and filter surface water runoff, and there's, again, language in the development agreement to require that all surface water runoff is filtered and reduced and slowed. And parking areas are designed to include only the parking required for the uses on the subject property. This is where I mentioned earlier, we've got some control over parking in all of our development agreements. Usually we just list a minimum, but in this case we've provided a minimum and a maximum. 1 to 2 parking spaces per unit is required within the development agreement. And again, that avoids any major parking lot areas that are impervious and may contribute to more runoff. So reducing the number of parking spots ensures that more trees are kept, more vegetation is retained, and hopefully leading towards a water quality protection. So back to criteria E, if the use is a listed permitted use, the conditions that prevent the proposal from being permitted as of right is addressed by the development agreement, including enhanced buffering and positioning in the design of buildings and structures. And this is really where we got to the site plan. We were able to address the site plan characteristics by pushing some buildings in, pushing some buildings back from the lake, and requiring a lot of buffering and vegetation. And the final criteria points us back to those general criteria. So we look to see, is the proposal in keeping with the planning strategy? And staff are confident that, in many ways it is. There are a lot of tourism and visitor-oriented business kind of policies and objectives, tourism objectives, that would support this type of business model. There's no real financial impact on the municipality. The site is certainly likely to be capable of servicing itself through on-site well and on-site septic, and some septic analysis has been done already. The applicant's been working with Ideal Septic Works on a design for this property. No identified well fields in the area, and generally a suitable site for this kind of thing. It's a wooded property on a beautiful lake. I think a suitable site. When we talk about land use compatibility, though, this is where it gets a bit trickier. Staff are are feeling like we've reached a kind of compromise in that the property should be fairly well buffered, and both from a noise impact perspective, but also a visual perspective, which addresses some of the land use compatibility concerns that we heard. But it's fair to say that there were a lot of concerns raised from the public. Some people probably feel that it's not a compatible land use, and that's a fair perspective. Staff are confident that we've tweaked the development agreement to the point where the positioning of these things should be relatively hidden from most people around the lake. There will obviously be some noise and some impact, but it's consistent with some of the policies here that enable tourism opportunities in the county, particularly in the shoreland areas. And so staff are confident recommending this to the Planning Advisory Committee. Just a review of the site plan. When I describe that 100-foot setback, that's this area here. Again, vegetated, all of these kind of dotted areas are vegetated, so most of the vegetation remains. Some clearing is obviously required for placement of these individual cabins, but for the most part, most of this vegetation is expected to remain. So the development agreement, in general, it allows for up to 20 cabins. I think the applicant intends to phase this development with 4 or 5 initially, and then maybe a few more to kind of see how that goes. I don't believe the intent is to build all 20 at once. The development agreement, however, enables up to 20 and in various formats. Again, so we're talking potentially geodesic domes or some domes, some tunnel tents, and some teardrop sort of units. Again, it requires all development to be set back 100 feet from the edge of the lake. A lot of vegetation retention language in this particular development agreement. A drainage system requirements, and requiring Nova Scotia environment approval for septic and well water systems. So the same properties that were notified of the public information meeting were also notified of this public hearing. Ads were placed in the local newspaper, and all statutory requirements have been met. There were 2 written submissions forming part of this public hearing from a couple of folks who were not able to be here tonight. Those were distributed to council last week. I trust you've had an opportunity to review those. And we do have a couple of presentations downloaded here ready to go too. So I expect there may be some discussion. So with that, I would pass it back to the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fredericks. Again, looking to council to see whether anybody has any questions of clarification of Mr. Fredericks on this presentation. I see a couple, Mr. Fredericks, starting with Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Mark. It was mentioned that this lake frontage is roughly 500 feet, and also I understand if a boat launch is put there, up to 75 feet of the 500 can be removed or cleared for the boat launch?
That's correct, yep.
Thank you.
And Councillor Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mark. My question is with respect to the lake water monitoring program. Is this lake included in the lake monitoring? And was there a report received for the 2022 and considered by the Lake Water Monitoring Committee to date?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, Sunken Lake is part of the program. It's been tested for over 20 years now. We are working diligently to sort out the last couple of years of reporting, which has been delayed significantly. But so the 2022 results have not come out yet, and we're kind of backlogged there. So we're working through a couple of administrative kind of processes there, but we do expect that report to be available likely in the spring of this year.
And yeah, it's too bad it's not available at this point in time when we're making the decision, particularly if the last couple of years are still outstanding. So the sewer system for those cabins, would there be one sewer, everything going into one sewer system, or how is that to be handled? Or Is that totally the purview of the province? I know the provinces keep part.
Yeah, it's ultimately up to the province to approve that system. I think, though, that the applicants intended to use a system that's kind of growable, if you will. So a system that may be sized for the kind of first phase of development, but then could be expanded if they build additional units. But again, that approval is ultimately through the Nova Scotia Department of Environment. We didn't specifically look for a design to be provided at this stage.
Thank you, and I appreciate the work that you and staff did to work through the issues along the process there. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Windsor. Thank you, Mr. Fredericks. If I could just piggyback on Councillor Windsor's questions for a moment and for clarification of council and those in the audience. When we enter into a development agreement, the agreement deals with those aspects that the municipality governs or is able to govern. Once the agreement is executed, subsequent to that, any structures that are built or placed in that location, and any septic or water systems that are built or placed in that location are in the first case, that the units would be subject to municipal permitting, so they must pass that hurdle as well. And secondly, it is, as you've said, the Department of Environment that handles the water wastewater issue. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of clarification? Seeing none, we're going to the public for presentations on the matter. And Mr. Boats, you've registered as the first speaker, so you're up, sir. If you just identify yourself for the purpose of the record, something I forgot to ask Mr. Beaton to do.
Matthew Boats. I reside at 905 Ridge Road. We have a cottage at 874 Sunken Lake Road. So, first off, I want to thank Council for allowing me the time and the privilege to state my case. It's an honor of which I don't take lightly. It's part of our heritage, I guess, to be able to voice our concerns. Thank you. So I'm going to begin the presentation by perhaps figuring out this thing first. I'm going to give a little background and then move on to perhaps a little overview of my thoughts, and then get into some detail and then conclude. So it shouldn't take too long. By way of background, our cottage was built in 1959 by my wife's parents, Frank and Madeline, and Holly and I purchased the cottage in 2006 from her parents. The cottage is located on rented or leased land, now owned by the applicant Kenzel Properties. We've seen lots of changes in the Sunken Lake community. Most recently, a number of the cottages have been renovated and are now occupied year-round, not just seasonally. And I wonder, and I'll wonder out loud, whether perhaps this year-round occupation is now affecting water quality. Sunken Lake is spring-fed with no inlets and one outlet. I'm asking you to keep this in mind, as I believe the recharge of the lake originates from groundwater. I consider a spring groundwater. However, I'm no hydrologist or an expert in the field. The water quality in 2022 was impacted by an algae bloom, which Mr. Fredericks alluded to. And whether this occurred due to climate change or as a result of human impact by residents, I don't think anyone here can definitively say, although like most things, I suspect it's a combination of more than one action. I can report that in my 42 years of enjoying the lake, I've never witnessed an algae bloom at Sunken Lake until this past summer. Water levels at the lake were low in 2022, so low that some boats were unable to dock at their wharves. Reasons for my objection. This is just a brief overview. Lake water quality may be negatively affected. There is no engineers or environmental study on the potential effect on Sunken Lake of this proposed development. There's no risk evaluation on the proposed commercial development. The proposed development agreement lacks broad protection for the lake environment. Sunken Lake currently has approximately 75 dwellings, which include 4 short-term rentals plus the Boy Scout camp. Adding 20 additional short-term rentals to, at times, a testy relationship with long-term residents is extreme and excessive. The planning department has not addressed several areas in the municipal planning strategy which requires attention. And finally, council needs to follow the county environmental policy EPW 04002 and the County of Kings Strategic Plan 2021 through 2024 under the banner Environmental Stewardship, support sustained and improved water quality and protection. Now I'm going to go perhaps into some details on the points just mentioned. Most of the 75 current dwellings located on Sunken Lake draw water from the lake for human consumption. This use of surface water is necessary due to high concentrations of arsenic in the area, which can affect well water. Human consumption, as defined by the Nova Scotia Environment Department, includes water used for drinking, bathing, showering, oral hygiene, cooking, food preparation, or dishwashing. The proposed development of 20 units, water to be supplied via a well, will meet a threshold of a public drinking water supply, as it will have at least 15 service connections, as well as being a commercial property for accommodation of the traveling public, containing 4 rental units, including cottages or cabins. As part of the new public drinking water supply program, the operators are mandated by the province of Nova Scotia to do the following. They're supposed to have regular and frequent water testing, microbiological and chemical testing to be conducted by approved laboratories, suppliers to meet stringent water quality standards, prescribed action to be taken if problems arise, and clear requirements for the immediate person-to-person communications of reports of potentially unsafe water situations to the Nova Scotia Environment and Department and Labor and the local medical officer of health. Under the proposed development agreement, no water testing of Sunken Lake is proposed. This would include prior to the development construction or ongoing. I can only think that surely the residents of Sunken Lake are just as important as all the other residents of the county, worth receiving protection of its water supply. I would say, this is unscientific, but I would say probably 80% of the people of the cottages and residents out there take water from the lake. And it's because of the arsenic. The county and its water supply partners are making significant investments in wellfield protection strategies that include land use bylaws, land acquisition, ministerial orders, but they all have a common theme: protection of the resource, water. This proposed development agreement doesn't meet the required standard of protection. The report of the Planning Advisory Committee by Planning and Development Services reported that the county's Lake Monitoring Committee reported good to excellent water quality for Sunken Lake. In my opinion, utilizing this data for the purposes of evaluating this development permit is flawed. My reasoning is the parameters in which the Lake Monitoring Committee utilized. This is not collecting data for water utilized for human consumption, but for generally comparative purposes that compares surface water from one lake to another. In addition, the data the Planning Department relies upon is already dated, its 2019 report. On the County of Kings website concerning the lake monitoring program, under the section on septic systems and modeling versus monitoring, there are 2 quotes I consider pertinent for your consideration. The first one on septic systems. Septic systems are the single biggest source, I'm going to perhaps butcher this, anthropogenic phosphorus in our lakes. Although it takes 10 or even 40 years, the soil in the disposal field will eventually become saturated with nutrients such as phosphorus, which migrate into the lake via the water table. Other potential sources of phosphorus are lawn fertilizers, including compost, soaps, and detergents. And the second point regarding modeling versus monitoring, monitoring limits the interpretation of data to current conditions with no prediction for the future. In fact, that's exactly what the Planning Department is using. They're using dated data and expanding the thought that, okay, Sunken Lake is fine, and it's going to be that way in 5 years, 10 years. The experts say something different. So, on the screen, there are 2 tables. The one on the left is the test done by the Lake Monitoring Committee, and the one on the right is the minimum testing of water to meet Nova Scotia Department of Environment standards. Quite a difference. I'm not a chemist, but you can see there's a variety of chemical testing that is done, and this is the testing that's going to end up having to be done if this is approved, if the development permit was approved, because of the standards which I've mentioned. On a report to the Planning Advisory Committee on November 8th, 2022, the County of Kings Planning Department suggested in the report to the Planning Advisory Committee that an engineer's letter attached to the application stated that the development would not negatively impact lake health. This statement by Planning and Development Services is incorrect. The letter states, based on the above, we are confirming that the proposed road construction will not impact Sunken Lake negatively. Please note, the letter only addresses road construction. The engineer's letter does not address the overall proposal. And I'm sure you have it as part of your documentation. You can check it yourself. Lack of broad protection for the lake environment. In my view, the Planning Department has somehow advanced its thinking to a point that if a proposal for a development agreement, in this case specifically Sunken Lake, meets policy, it should proceed. I object to this thinking based on the following. Not sufficient weight has been considered under the county policy EPW 04002, the environmental policy, which states amongst many comments that protection of the natural environment is a primary mandate of the county, and we will operate in a manner that ensures compliance with all relevant federal, provincial, and municipal environmental policies, bylaws, and legislation. Lastly, environmental responsibility and environmental stewardship will be realized through due diligence, pollution prevention, efficient use of resources, and sustainable community planning. The proposed development agreement provides insufficient buffer for the lake. This proposal includes a lower roadway, which is near the lake. When you consider the likely width of the roadway and current unvegetated beach area, the proposed vegetated buffer is inadequate. And there is a copy of the environmental policy that I mentioned. Short-term rental impacts. Currently, there are 4 short-term rentals plus the Boy Scout camp that's also being rented out to groups other than the Boy Scouts. There have been incidents of disruptive behavior at some of the short-term rental units. That disruptive behavior has negatively impacted some of the residents of the lake. Some of the renters, not all, some of the renters of short-term rental units do not respect the peace and tranquility of their neighbors. Adding 20 short-term rentals to a small geographical area and depending upon trees and vegetation to reduce disruptive behavior is insufficient. The current ratio of short-term rental units to established cottages is 1 to 20. This will increase to 1 to 4. That's a 5-fold increase if the proposed development is permitted to proceed. This ratio of commercial development should never be permitted in a residential area. No covenants have been added by the planning department to address possible negative outcomes of adding 20 units. Some of the possible restrictions could include designated quiet hours, no RV camping, no tents other than the 25 identified units, security on site 24/7, restrictions on boat engine size. These are all possibilities. Deficiencies in the planning strategy. I'm not a planner. Don't mind reading. While I acknowledge the County of Kings Bylaw 105, Municipal Planning Strategy, Section 2.6, drinking water, deals specifically with groundwater, but here is the connection. Sunken Lake has no inlets. Where do you think the water comes from? It comes from groundwater, springs, I don't care. They're one and the same. They're intertwined. I believe Council must exercise due diligence and extend the protections offered in this policy to the residents of Sunken Lake that utilize lake water for their consumption. I quote the context. All other development considerations are secondary to safe and reliable drinking water, as its supply is essential to public health and community stability. The residents of Sunken Lake want to protect the water they consume from commercial development. In my opinion, Council cannot in good conscience state that the proposed development agreement complies with MPS 5.3.7, which states the Council shall be satisfied to enter into a development agreement. It is not premature or inappropriate due to negative impacts on identified well fields or other groundwater supplies for the area, pollution in the area, including but not limited to soil erosion and siltation of water courses, or negative impacts on water quality or nearby wetlands. In my opinion, Council cannot at this point be satisfied that the proposed development agreement satisfies criteria established in the Municipal Planning Strategy 5.3.8, where it talks about reducing the impacts of noise, odor, dust, or light, or any other form of emission or other properties in the area. Reducing the potential for contamination or of interference with well fields or other designated groundwater supply protection areas. And finally, reducing contamination risk and damage to either the natural or built environment. MPS 5.3.9 has not been adequately utilized by staff to request detailed information from the applicant to determine whether the criteria for entering into the development agreement have been met, as follows without limitation. A drainage and stormwater management plan prepared by a professional engineer that demonstrates the impact the proposal will have on adjacent lands or existing stormwater management systems. A hydrological study of groundwater resources to determine quality, available volume, and natural flows of the resource, and to identify the area and rate of recharge. Finally, an environmental study carried out by a qualified person to assess risks to the environment, including but not limited to species at risk and environmental contamination. Back in early December, I came to a similar meeting on, I guess it was December the 6th, to do with Ridge Road, funny enough. I came here to try and understand how council works, maybe even how they think. I've tried to avoid emotional comments. I'm going to continue. However, one of the things that was brought up by the planning department was statements of provincial interest. We got a short lesson on that, councillors as well as myself. Now, in this guide, and I readily admit this slide relates largely to municipal-owned or operated water utilities. But there is a line in there that you need to note. Municipalities are encouraged to work with other owners and operators to protect the quality of all drinking water supplies. I guess you're going to have to ask yourself that question. Under this agreement, are you doing that? When I get to my conclusion, the municipality of the County of Kings enabled a strategic plan for 2021 to 2024. I'm not sure if we're in year 2 or 3 of that plan, but one of the banners of the documents is environmental stewardship, support sustained and improved water quality and protection. The applicant, through the planning department, is asking the residents of Sunken Lake to possibly sacrifice their peaceful environment and water quality for the applicant's financial gain. In essence, the residents are going to assume the risk. The identified risks are too great. I'm going to request council to follow its own environmental policies and reject the application for commercial development. The residents of Sunken Lake, the residents of the municipality of the County of Kings require good leadership on this file, as well as due diligence on the part of each one of you. Just because you can approve the application doesn't mean you should. Now, if any of you have any questions, fire away.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Boats. So you've done your homework.
I tried.
I appreciate seeing that. Any councillor have any question of clarification of Mr. Boats? Deputy Mayor Lutz.
Thank you, Mayor Mattard. Through you to Mr. Boats. Curious about your feelings about the application as a whole, or the relative size of the application. Would you feel that the application, were it of a different size, would be more of a fit with the community?
Well, I can only speak for myself. I can tell you that my primary concern is the water quality. That's first and foremost. I've tried to press that through correspondence to the planning department. We're on different pages. I don't know what else to say. The noise is, I worry about that. I worry that the community is changing very quickly before my very eyes. I could see, you asked me an honest question, and I'm going to give you an honest answer. Could I see maybe 5? I could probably see 5. And I could probably live with 5 if we can deal with the water quality issues. But I just can't see how do you put, I mean, I realize that granted, it may be done in sections, you know, like lots of 5 or something, but the approval is for 20. So I'm saying that's what I have to be prepared for, is 20. And I can't live with 20, personally. And I'm the only one. I mean, I can't speak for everybody else because people will nervous of voicing their opinions. That's a reality. So I don't share that thought. Hopefully I've answered your question.
Thank you, it does.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hello, Mr. Boats. Just a quick question. You said that you and other residents around the lake use lake water.
Yes.
For consumption, human consumption.
Yes.
Do you treat it in any way?
Yes, I do. We have a UV light as well as filters.
Okay.
So for drinking water, we bring in our own drinking water from home. But, I mean, we shower in it and wash dishes. We do that with it. I suspect most people follow the same, I don't know about UV filters, but I think that most of them filter to some degree and bring in for specific drinking water, largely bring it in themselves.
So you don't use it for drinking?
No.
You don't use it for drinking water, strictly for like toilets and showers and things like that?
Dishes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? No? Sorry, Deputy Mayor.
I have a question, but it may be for staff, so but it is related to something Mr. Boats raised, if I'm permitted.
You're permitted as long as you're not inviting staff into an argument with Mr. Boats.
I would never.
Okay.
No, my question, as I had the privilege of being the chair of the Lake Monitoring Committee for 4 years, but since 2020, that honor has been given to Councillor Harding. And while I used to spend a lot of time reading those reports, I haven't since I have no longer sat in the chair position. So curious if staff could give a kind of a brief synopsis of what the most recent report, so we don't have the 2020 results obviously, but for 2021, algae blooms are not, this isn't the first lake or the only lake that had an algae bloom this summer. Are we seeing a general trend towards more algae blooms and decline in the water? Okay.
Sorry, I was turning off my own light so other people could be heard. I believe the presenters referred to the last report being 2019, did you not? Yeah.
Yes.
So perhaps we could pick it up there, Mr.
Sure, yeah, thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Lutz. The latest report was 2019, and the 2020 and 2021 reports are expected any day now. We had a technical advisory committee in November, a meeting of that technical advisory committee in November, and our consultant is somewhat unpredictable in that way. We expected them to be there that day, and we're still struggling to sort that out. So, yeah, like I said earlier, administrative kind of struggles with that program, but we're working on that and working on a better plan forward for the 2022 season. Generally, though, we had a review of some of the data from the past couple of years, and generally it doesn't seem to be painting a worse picture for lake water quality overall, though, yes, we did see more algal blooms in certain lakes. So I'm not sure what to make of that. I mean, I think the advice of that committee seems to be that warmer water is, I mean, that's the breeding ground for algae. You need to have something like 26-degree water that's relatively still to provide that opportunity for this blue-green algae to bloom. So that kind of condition may be more present in a longer, hotter summer. Not to say that there aren't a number of influences. I think Mr. Boats pointed to that there are probably a number of factors there. But overall, it doesn't seem to be worsening overall. Some lakes, get slightly better. Some lakes get slightly worse. But overall, the lakes are relatively clean. There are a few trouble lakes where there's algal blooms almost every summer, like Armstrong and Torment. The water quality, at least from the parameters that we test, are not suggesting that the water quality is deteriorating rapidly, no.
Thank you, Mr. Fredericks. Any further questions of the presenter for clarification? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Boats. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you to all.
Are there any other persons who wish to make representations? Please come forward, and just when you get to the mic, identify yourself for the purposes of the record.
Hello, my name is Mary Tanner Long. I'm a lifetime resident of the Sunken Lake area. Speaking on behalf of myself and my husband, who also grew up in the area, have raised our families there, have lived there all our lives. Don't live on the lake, but across the road from the lake. Used to visit the campground that was there previously on a daily basis, probably from the time I was 5 years old. Swam there daily. Played at one point when it was the campground. We're talking about noise. They had tents and trailers hauled in there, large families. At one point, a big metal swing that all day long. They had a dock out in the water with kids running and jumping and screaming. I don't think that's what's going to happen here with this proposal. It's not geared for that type of camping. It's a more relaxation nature retreat. As I have been, told by the proposed developers, that's, they want to keep it as natural as possible, which nature is, sometimes noisy, is sometimes quiet. But I think the overall objective is a relaxing nature retreat. It's not going to be someplace that, like I say, kids running around and screaming and playing football and water fights and balloons and all that stuff. So I think that noise issue is a little bit irrelevant in my opinion. Like I say, I can only speak for myself, as did he, but that's not the vibe I get from the whole thing. And drinking water, this might be a rhetorical question, but should it be permitted that all these properties draw water out of the lake for personal and household use? Maybe that's another issue altogether. I can't draw my water from the lake. I had to drill a well. So, and yes, the lake was low this summer, and yes, the water was warm, too warm to swim in some days. It just wasn't even refreshing. It's spring fed. We have a spring on our property that is crocked, and this summer, it usually overflows all the time. This summer, it was down to half of the level that it usually is. So all water levels were down this year. Possibly contributing to an algae bloom? I would say probably. So a lot of these concerns that are being raised, I mean, they're valid concerns, but also concerns that, you know, have explanations. And as far as things like, you know, the septic and the well and what like that, we all know about all the permitting that has to take place for these things to happen. When I was a kid traveling back and forth to the lake on my bicycle or walking, there was no parking lot. Cars pulled in there and parked anywhere from the top of the hill right down to the lake front, sometimes in the lake and being washed in the lake. Like, we know that's not going to happen. There's going to be a parking lot. These domes or tents or wherever they're, you know, they're not, people are not going to be doing what used to happen at the lake. Like I say, permits wouldn't even allow that. There was outhouses on the hill. Like, I'm talking old-fashioned one-hole outhouses that, you know, that's not going to happen. Permits don't allow that to happen. So I understand the concern. I live there too. I've lived there all my life. I've raised my children. My grandchildren are now there. I don't want the environment wrecked either. I canoe, I kayak, I swim, I hike and bike and all that stuff. And thanks to the generosity of the proposed developers, I'm allowed to access the lake through their property, which I'm forever grateful for, because I live across the road from the lake. I don't have access. I walk across their property or bicycle across their property to access the lake and to hike and to bike around the lake and all the things that my family love to do. And yes, I don't want any of that to be harmed in any way, but I can't. I've been to some of these other places where there's glamping, and, you know, like I say, with permits and requirements, these other places have had, you know, septic systems that are the composting toilets and things like that. There's rules and regulations and permits in place so those kinds of things don't happen. So of course I don't want to be awake all night, you know, with partying, but again, this is not that type of situation. It's geared more for, you know, small groups, probably couples, maybe a couple children or two, but like realistically, anyone that has, you know, a bunch of small kids, you're not going to probably take them to a dome camping for a week. You know, it's short term. It's people that are there doing the same thing that mostly all the residents around the lake like to do: walk, hike, bike, kayak, paddleboard, swim, maybe, you know, maybe a campfire and some weenies and marshmallows with a glass of wine in the evening. Anyway, like I say, I don't have a presentation and lots of background. I just live in the area across the road from the lake, have been using the lake since I've been literally 5 years old, which is a long time. And like I say, I want to still be able to enjoy the lake. I want to be able to enjoy my community, but I also want to share it. It's a beautiful, it's God's country to us, and that's how we want it to remain. Sorry. I had another point and I lost my train of thought. Oh, the other point was, in our community, it was a farming community, obviously. It's up on the South Mountain by a lake. My husband is his family were farmers. That's dying off. Our community is shrinking. We are so thrilled to see some life coming back to our community. The older folks, quote unquote, are dying off. And we now, at nearly 60, are becoming that generation. We're trying to get our children to come back to the community with their kids, our grandkids, and enjoy that beautiful lifestyle that we have there. Like, there's nothing like it. Just to even be able to sit at my place, I can't see the lake from my yard, but to sit there and hear the loons. And I look at them and I say, my loons are calling me, I gotta go. And I walk 5 minutes across the lake, you know, and I watch the loons and watch this baby loon from being hatched to flying, you know. It's amazing. We want to preserve that, but we also want to share it. And personally, myself and my family, I'm speaking on behalf of my family, we can see no way that this development will harm that way of life and harm the environment. There's no way that, I know this family, there's no way that this family is going to see the lake being negatively impacted. They live there too. Like, if they see the water quality going downhill, do you think they're just going to say, oh, well, I got the rent from them, so that's all that meant? No, they care about it too. We care about it. And like I say, it's our opinion, we cannot see this development harming our lake and our lifestyle and our piece of God's country in any way. Like I say, I hope this is all right. Like I say, it's just our opinion, but I was told I could speak, so I did. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Mrs. Long. Are there any questions of clarification from any councillor? The Deputy Mayor has a question for you.
Okay.
Thank you. Just curious if you could tell me, there was a campground on the same location as
Yes.
the proposed development?
Yes.
And when was that non-operable? When did that cease operation?
When they died, I don't know the year. About 15 years ago.
Thank
There
you.
was, so they allowed RVs and tents, and they also had 4 wooden buildings that they rented out as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Those are all the questions, I
Okay.
think. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Mrs. Long. Is there any other member of the public who wishes to present? Yes, sir. Same routine, if you don't mind, when you come to the mic, if you would identify yourself for the purpose of the record and your place of residence, please.
You have my presentation? Perfect. My name is Chesley Long. I am a permanent resident at Sunken Lake. I am here speaking on behalf of Kenzel Properties. So appreciate you guys allowing me to present and hearing me out. Do I just hit the right button to continue on this? Okay. First off, I just wanted to thank the Kings County staff. They've been extremely professional. I appreciate the process. I love the ability to compromise and find out the regulations that we need to adhere to as a member of the public looking to achieve goals within my community. I did not know the small details, and they were extremely helpful and allowed us to negotiate, find better ways to make this proposal move forward and accommodate our community in the way that we wanted to. So thank you to them, and it's been incredible and long process. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I am a full-time resident of the lake. My family has been residents of the lake generations back over 100 years. My mother lives on the lake. I drink the lake water myself. And it's amazing, and it's an incredible place to live. And we're happy to share, as the proposed developers, that we have the same concerns that were raised by our community. Maybe not all, but most of the applicable concerns we share, and water quality certainly being one of them. And we made compromises, which we'll speak to later, but I'm happy to report that Kenzel shares in the concerns that were raised. And I believe that the staff and the Planning Advisory Committee did a great job at the first meeting of differentiating applicable concerns and those that were brought up that do not apply to this policy and review. And just to highlight a few things that were brought up as concerns that were reported, public boat launch, more boats on the water, contamination. There is no boat launch in our proposal in the drawing. It's something that has been brought up on a regular basis. It's not in there. We are not adding motorized vehicles to the lake. It is a small lake. We recognize that, and we want to keep it the way it is. We are not hosting weddings, DJs, or parties, as some of the information pointed to. I believe there was some confusion in our first rendition of a drawing that said community building. We've since renamed it to facilitate a better understanding. It's called an amenities building. Some of these units do not have septic or cooking facilities, and much like if you were to visit Keji or a national park, there is an amenities building to either use the bathroom or cook. So the community building that was going to have a large impact on noise in our community does not exist. As some of the complaints, it's an amenities building to supply support to those units that do not have cooking or bathroom facilities. I always believe in going over and above. Bare minimum is never enough. And we worked with your staff to ensure that we were exceeding policy criteria. We hired the professionals. Contrary to some of the statements that were mentioned, we did hire professionals. There are professional opinions well above ours and your staff as to what we will be meeting. We do have an engineered erosion plan. We do have an engineered drainage plan that ensures we are not going to negatively impact the quality of the lake. And we believe if in the rest of the county that 65 feet is enough for shoreland development, 100 feet we wanted to go above. We wanted to exceed that community standard, and that a noise buffer of over 50% increase will achieve that. Will achieve the water quality. All of this 100-foot setback, since the original complaints were sent in, this is how we compromised. 100-foot setback. So much more significant than the rest of development made in this county, and we're confident that this will achieve noise buffering and any other type of buffering required. And I think it's important to point out that the actual direct neighbors to this proposed development and those that received the letter for being within 500 feet are not against this development. One is a scout ground that operates in the same way. The other property is ours, a northern property is ours, and it's vacant land in another direction. So as far as buffering, we've achieved that in many ways, not only with 100 feet, but by the neighboring properties that aren't opposed to this development on its own. From what I understand, and again, you can refer to your staff if this statement is true, however, most development proposals as they go through the process are approved, and a subsection of that approval is that the landowner must obtain a permit from Nova Scotia Environment for septic. This normally takes place after you get approval. So you get approval from the county to develop, and then you would seek an approval for a septic system. We wanted to assure again that we were going over and above and exceeding regulations, and we have received the approval from the Nova Scotia Environment in advance of this meeting to ensure what we are proposing is going to be welcomed by the Nova Scotia Environment and meet the criteria that they and the standards that they set at the provincial level for septic. Shifting gears a little bit, I just want to see Kings County thrive. I grew up here. I left at the age of 18 due to a declining Nova Scotia economy. I grew up in a family that owned a lumber mill. We were entrepreneurs here, and I had to leave along with many of my peers. We had a declining population when I left. I believe it's this type of policy that changes the ability to keep Kings County residents working in Kings County. I have moved home to be closer to family and hopefully, change my lifestyle and work within my county. And this policy allows for more development within Kings County through us hiring local contractors, other employees, and just keeping residents home here in Nova Scotia as opposed to seeing them take their skills in other places. If we shift the vacant residential land that's currently there to this commercial opportunity, that increases the amount of taxes that we contribute to the county. These taxes can then help the rest of the community thrive. I want to see our contribution to the community help other businesses and other members of our community increase what we have to offer here. And from what I understand, Nova Scotia has made a mandate that we must focus on rural economic development. As Mary mentioned, it's hard to keep people here. And if we allow rural economic development and share what we have, it'll be an incredible tourist attraction. And there's just a great room and opportunity for growth. There are limited places for visitors to stay within our county. I don't think anybody can debate that, whether you have a family member coming to visit or we can point to the CFL game that came here in the summer. It was very unfortunate upon speaking to local business owners of restaurants this summer that after the game, I expected a long lineup and not being able to get food anywhere because all of these people had come here to spend their money in Kings County. Come to find out, without anywhere to stay, no tourist attractions available, we had to bus 8,000 people back to Halifax where there are places to stay. There's nowhere to stay in our county to allow other businesses to thrive. I think that this is an important opportunity for our county to give people places to stay so that they can spend money at our other businesses, support our farmers, support the wineries and other restaurants. And, you know, in speaking to allowing us to thrive and there not being anywhere to stay, here is a letter that you guys have seen in your documentation of somebody that is opposed to registered short-term rentals at Sunken Lake. This is one of our tenants, Larry. I appreciate his concern and I welcome it. All of these are valid concerns that we wanted to address. These people that are opposed to registered vacation rentals at Sunken Lake are booking registered vacation rentals at Sunken Lake. So on my next slide, Larry Bennett, as you can see the booking date at the top there, just a week ago, December 27th, 2022, booked our registered short-term rental on Sunken Lake for the summer of 2023. The very people that are writing in concerned about short-term vacation rentals on their lake are booking short-term vacation rentals on the lake. They need it, we need it, and I think it's just a welcomed opportunity to grow what's happening at Sunken Lake. So, in closing, we're excited for the opportunity to have a hand in rural economic development in Kings County. We believe that working with your staff, we've exceeded all criteria within the policy. We've worked closely with the staff and the community to make adjustments, compromise. You know, again, we can continue to point to that 100-foot setback. That is significant, and we believe it will achieve everything that you're asking from us. We trust the process, your staff, and some of the things that were just brought up recently that I wanted to address was that the algae bloom that's been spoken of, there is no confirmed test. So Nova Scotia Environment, if you look in their reports, they don't test for blue-green algae. So somebody, they put out an advisory for safety. The Nova Scotia Environment does that just to protect the environment. No testing was done, and no testing is done. So to speak to water quality without any results, in which the complainant is asking for results in other regards, if we don't have results in others, I believe that should just be addressed. You know, noise, we are the majority landowners out there and we love our current tenants. They're an incredible contributor and they respect and are great stewards of the land. I spend more time administering the noise complaints I get from our long-term tenants than I do for any of our short-term rentals. And I just think that that's important to note, that the noise that they are likely already complaining about, that they hear other neighbors, are from the long-term tenants, not from short-term. And you know, some of the other things, vegetation within the policy and the development agreement, we are keeping as much vegetation as possible along the shoreline that creates the buffer, must be maintained. This is what we're agreeing to, and we're agreeing to keep all of the vegetation that exists there except for the cutouts to ensure that there's parking for the cabins. So I believe that addresses everything for our proposal, and happy to, of course, field any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Are there any questions of clarification of Mr. Long? Deputy Mayor Lutz.
I'm sorry, I have so many questions because I wasn't here in December. So some of these have already been asked, or this was discussed in December by council in the initial debate, then I apologize. Okay, so just to clarify, the two buildings on the property, were they used for the campground that was there before?
Yes, the one was an office space that was used to welcome guests at the campground.
And would the plan be to build everything all at once or do it in phases?
Absolutely in phases. I mean, there's so many reasons to do that, and especially environmental impact. I don't want to build 20 units and find out that it has a negative impact on the lake. Starting at an appropriate amount and developing supply, demand, environment, vegetation, there's a number of reasons to ensure that we do it in a certain way. And yes, to answer that question, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hi. In Mr. Frederick's presentation, he showed us a couple of different examples of the type of structure you're going to build. What would be the maximum capacity of one of those? Like, what would the largest one hold?
Right. So the development agreement points to a 700 square foot layout. It's pretty hard to limit the number of people and guests that are staying, but the intention is from 2 maximum to 4.
And how many, are they all that size?
No. So that would
Of the
be for,
okay.
you know, let's just say for 50% would accommodate that, and the other 50 would be 2 guests.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Meisner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You did mention that there will be amenity buildings. So I'm just wondering how many of these proposed units will have facilities within them?
I think it would be about 50% will have the facilities on site, and the other 50% may not. And the amenity buildings will only be built when we phase in some smaller units. And at what point we get to that, that's a discussion that we need to have after receiving an approval as to how many units. Budget changes all the time, prices are changing, and demand is changing. So, you know, those are things that we're going to address after. But the amenities building may never be required to be built if we don't get to making the smaller units.
And just another question, if I may. Will linens and all of that be provided for those who do come, or will those be, and then also will those be laundered on site, or will they be laundered off site? Just wondering of the capacity with that.
So they will be laundered off site. We don't have the capacity to be doing that on site, and so Vail Laundry Services in New Minas is a contractor that we've already just asked if they're capable of doing that. So yes, the water required to do the laundry is required in the larger units that have the bathrooms. The smaller ones will not have linens, but we will not be processing the linens on site.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions of clarification from Council? I'm curious as to how large the lake is. Length, width?
Geez, a little over 1 kilometer long and under 1 kilometer wide.
And how you own all the lots around the lake?
We do not own all of the PIDs around Sunken Lake. We do own a majority.
Okay. Other than those that are currently leased, do you have others for lease?
Can you clarify your question?
Well, how many, if I wanted to rent a lot on your lake, would one be available for me?
We do not currently have any available. However, that's an ongoing change of hands. So we do not have any new land being offered up for lease. However, we do have tenants that do depart for various reasons and terminate their lease, and then we enter into a new lease agreement with new tenants.
I see. Okay. Thank you. One last question from Councillor Windsor.
Thank you. First, I just want to say I really appreciate this evening the different perspectives that we get, but to hear that as it progressed, changes were made. So while those who are still opposed may not be totally happy after, I really believe they made a.
We don't want to get into issues of debate or
no, it's not
indications
debate.
of whether we favor or not until we get into debate.
Yeah, it's just that I believe that the process is working and they're having an impact. But I just wanted to ask about the scout camp there. That's close to this area?
It is the adjacent property to the north.
And I believe I did see something from them to indicate that they're they have no opposition to this.
They are in complete support. We've had a working relation for over 60 years. We work well with them, and we believe that our business will support their business in many ways to help them thrive as they also rent their property out. And just more attention to their services and getting more children involved in recreation is something that we support, and we've always had a great relationship. And speaking to the campground that was there before, they used to have the members of Aldershot into the numbers of over 100 out to the lake at the scout ground, in collaboration with the Longs and the campground that existed there. And the number of people that have been on that lake before is far greater than we would ever see again. But to answer your question directly, yes, we've had great support, as you've noted in the emails from the scouts, that they're in great support of what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, Mr. Long, thank you for your presentation. Those are all the questions of clarification. We appreciate hearing from everyone. Does anyone else wish to present on the application before we close the hearing? Any other presentations? Seeing none, I want to thank you all for your attendance. We're going to adjourn this public hearing, and then we'll be entering into a council session that in my experience is totally unpredictable as to how long it will take, but you're welcome to stay or leave as you wish. So this public hearing is now closed. Does council wish to have a break before we move into the formal council? Okay. Then I'll declare recess for 15 minutes, and then we'll begin our council session. evening once again, gentlemen, ladies, councillors. It's 5 to 8 in the evening. We've just come from a public hearing and had a little break, a little refreshment break. And now we're ready to begin our council meeting for January 3rd, 2023. And we'll begin with roll call, please. Thank you. All councillors are present with the exception of Councillor Granger and Councillor Killam. You're all familiar with the notes that they gave us explaining the necessity for their absence. So I'm looking for a motion to excuse both councillors from attendance at this meeting, please. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. And for the public, the reason we have to pass such a resolution is that if a councillor misses 3 consecutive meetings without excuse, then they risk losing their council seat. That motion's passed unanimously. Thank you. And we're going to approval of the agenda. Item 2, the agenda has been circulated. Any errors or omissions anybody's familiar with? Looking for a motion to approve the agenda. The Deputy Mayor and Councillor Meisner, seconds. All those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. That's unanimously approved. Thank you. Once agendas are approved, I always look to council because we don't know what specifically is going to be on the agenda until the motion to approve has been passed. Now, each councillor has had an opportunity to review it and determine whether or not there's any item on the agenda with which they have a personal conflict that they feel they should declare. And now is the opportunity. I'll call for any conflicts of interest to be declared. Seeing none, then we'll proceed. Councillor Armstrong asked for a little bit of time at the beginning of the meeting in order to address us, but before she does, I just wanted to interject. We didn't have time prior to the public hearing because I was so late arriving, but I hope everyone had a good Christmas holiday, and I wish you all a happy new year. I look forward to working with council in 2023 as collegially as we did in 21 and 22. Councillor Armstrong, when you're ready, I'll get your light here first. There you go.
Thank you. I'd like to take a moment to express my and our condolences to the family and friends of Mr. Kirk McLennan. Mr. McLennan was the chair of the Aylesford Village Commission at the time of his passing on December 29th at home. Mr. McLennan, Kirk, was a retired member of the Canadian Air Force, a dedicated family man, and a champion for the village of Aylesford. It was my honor and pleasure to work with him. Our hearts and prayers are with his family. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor, and we all certainly share your sentiments for his family. Too many of these things happening of late. Moving on then on the agenda to the approval of the minutes of the meeting of December the 6th, 2022 Council. The minutes have been circulated. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, the Deputy Mayor has moved approval and Councillor Allen has seconded it. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. That Motion's unanimously approved. Thank you. Any business arising from the minutes that any councillor wishes to point out or raise at this time? No business arising, so we'll proceed to number 6, the Planning Advisory Committee recommendations of December 13th, 2022. And I'm calling upon the chair of the Planning Advisory Committee, Councillor Armstrong, to present those, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first item is that Municipal Council give final reading to the application to rezone 2853 Lovett Road, PID 555-13204, Coldbrook from the residential 1 and 2 unit R2 zone to the residential mixed density R3 zone as described in Appendix C of the report dated November 8, 2022. I so move.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Hurtle. Any discussion on the motion? No discussion on the motion? I would just, I'll say this, I'm going to vote in favor of the motion, but I will comment that this is one of those situations that I hope is very rare, and that is to say that we have technically what could be referred to as an illegal use, because it's currently has 3 units in the building when it's only zoned to have 2. There are times that arise where it's quite reasonable that we consider and correct those situations. There's other times when it's much more disturbing, where people have taken advantage and decided to do it now and ask for permission later. And in those cases, I would be speaking against the motion. But I am speaking for the motion in this case. Councillor Windsor.
Thank you, Mayor. I share your sentiments. I'm just wondering, did we do a similar agenda item 2 years ago? There, with very similar on Lovett Road.
Ms. Mosher.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Windsor. We did have a similar application on Lovett Road. That was under our old documents, and that went by development agreement.
And so, was it a different property, obviously?
Yes.
And different landlord?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mosher. Any other debate? Seeing none, all those in favor or otherwise of the motion, please vote now. That's unanimously passed. Thank you. Councillor Armstrong, back to you.
The Municipal Council give final consideration to entering into a development agreement to permit tourist cabins at 536 Sunken Lake Road, PID 555-31305, which is substantively the same, save for minor differences in form, as the draft set out in Appendix D of the report dated November 8, 2022. I so move.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Windsor. Discussion on the motion. Deputy Mayor Lutz.
Thank you, Mayor Mattar. Through you, I have a question for staff. So I'll first say that one of the positive things about having a development agreement is that it allows some compromise, and I think the applicant has shown a willingness to compromise. And I think the residents have shown some openness through some of the communication that I've read about feeling like there might be some compromise possible. I want to say that I really appreciate the attention to detail in the proposal and the natural native vegetation keep being intact. I think that's really important. And we all know at this point that the best thing for a lake is to have a natural drainage system built into it the way it was intended to, and to leave the shoreline intact and leave vegetation alone. So I do think care has been taken to protect the lake and the environment through the detail provided and the drainage and the Elgin system. However, I do feel like more people is more people. Having spent some time at the beautiful lake in a short-term rental several years ago where my son learned to kayak, it is beautiful and it is a wonderful spot to go. So you're all very lucky, I would say that, all of you, very lucky that you're able to be there. So I think where we have a development agreement in front of us, development agreements can be amended. They can be re-examined, albeit there's a process, as was pointed out by the applicant, that it's never as quick as we think it's going to be. So I think where there's been a similar use before on this land, I'm inclined to support the motion. However, I would like to see a way that we can kind of cement in this phased approach so that it is not an all at once, or if it's a partial approval. So I would look to staff to see if there is a way to embed the idea that it will be a phased project, or that there's a second approval, and hopefully without sort of the rigmarole that's required through a DA amendment, but rather have it embedded in the DA itself. Is that a possibility?
I don't generally invite staff to enter into the process of debate. Certainly not by putting them on the spot, but if staff was to indicate a desire to answer the deputy mayor's question, then I would certainly entertain that. So this is entirely as an explanation to the public. This is entirely the manner in which we proceed once, although I did allow some latitude to Councillor Windsor, and therefore I've kind of been stuck on my own petard here. I much prefer not to have staff involved in once debate has begun. So if the answer is readily at hand, and I think the question is it possible for this council, so it's a question of procedure, is it possible for this council to request that the matter be deferred until such time as staff has had an opportunity to consult with the developer as to whether or not he would commit within the agreement the phased approach that he has already described to us. But that would involve negotiating timing as well as size or number of units and so on. But if we're faced with the issue of whether it's 5 units or 10 units or 20 units, and then the comparison back to what it had been previously and so on, these are all matters that this council, having heard from both the opponents and proponent, that we can make decision based on that information. We have the comment of the developer that they intend to proceed on the phased approach. Question is whether we wish to push them to a contractual commitment to that. And it would be my ruling that unless I'm pressed by staff to allow a comment, that I not permit any further discussion with staff during the course of debate. We have all of the information before us. If you don't wish to pass this motion in the manner in which it is put, then there are opportunities for you either to decline or amend. So at the end of the day, my ruling is, Deputy Mayor, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to allow you to ask the question of staff.
It had to happen.
And I hope I just laid the groundwork for saying it's not going to happen in the future either.
I look forward to hearing my councillor colleagues' thoughts on the matter at hand, not on your ruling, but on the application itself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rulings are always appealable, I'd like to hasten to add.
I think it's fair.
Councillor Windsor for the second time.
First time.
I'm sorry, first time.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm not sure, I hope I'm not posing a questionnaire that is demanding an answer. But the question in my mind as we were discussing this, and it has happened before around lakes, is we approve stuff in either singular or, in this case, in quantums, numbers. But the question that arose there, I think, with Mr. Boats is, in the total picture, what is the implications on a proposed development with the sum of what's there and what's proposed? I can never, we evaluate in the singular kind of, and maybe the process, the standards are there that says, the way each singular development is approved, there's no implication on the lake. And so in total, there's no implication on the lake. It is always a question in my mind. And so I'm not expecting an answer. It's just, and I am supportive of the proposal. It's just there, and I don't know if it's answerable without. Anyway, we all know the complications or the complexity of things, and I believe we've been very good at safeguarding our waters. And so, anyway, I don't know if that's something that can be thought about, and there's a way in the future to consider something where there's a multiplicity of developments in one proposal. But it comes to mind. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Meisner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm kind of back and forth with this as we've talked about it. You know, water is one of those resources that once it's gone, you don't get it back. It's not something that you can reclaim, such as land. You know, you can tear down buildings and reclaim land. However, water quality is something that is not something that we can just renew. And looking at our MPS, there is, you know, I feel like a lot of it in terms of ensuring that we do protect the water is being taken care of. And I've spoken to residents prior to our public hearing and understand their concerns in terms of environmental concerns. And that is something that we as a county have really noted that we want to strive for. However, in hearing some of the conversations this evening and hearing some of the proposals from the applicant, I feel like a lot of due diligence has taken place here in order to ensure that the quality of the lake and the quality of the environment is sustained, but not only that, shared with those who may otherwise not have the opportunity to do so, and in turn perhaps teaching them a little bit about the importance of environmental and sustainability and being able to explore nature in a different setting. The size of the development does concern me because as Deputy Mayor Lutz stated, more people is more people. And so for 20 people, it does seem quite substantive compared to the size of the lake for how many people will be within there. So I'm kind of going back and forth with where I stand and how I feel, but I feel like there has been quite a great amount of detail, due diligence, thought, and great points brought up by both the applicant and the residents here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Allen. I'm sorry, your light's off. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Being the councillor for this district where Sunken Lake is located, I've received numerous emails, texts, and phone calls concerning this development agreement that permits up to 20 tourist cabins at 536 Sunken Lake. If in that development agreement, if we had the wording that would limit blocks of development at a time, I would find this very easy to vote in favor. But it doesn't. It opens the door to develop all 20 if that's the desire. There are a couple of things I would just like to comment on. Majority of these people, and probably over half the residents, have contacted me that own a cottage or home there. And a couple of things that they had in common, that this large development is not compatible with the very small size of the lake and its small community. The proposed 20 units would create a 27% increase in dwellings on that lake, which is a good size portion to increase it. And the comment about the wildlife on that lake, there's a nesting pair of loons. Nesting loons will not stay on a lake where it's heavily populated. They move away. They don't like people. So that's one of the things. And one of the other things, the additional of 60 to 120 people using the lake recreationally will most certainly disrupt the ecosystem of this small lake, the health of it. So we have to keep that all in mind. Someone mentioned once the quality of the water of the lake is destroyed, you can't bring it back easily. It's gone for a long period of time. So I'm on the fence about this, but if we had some wording where we could limit the amount of units that could be built in a block, and if that didn't affect the lake too much, then we'd allow a block of 5 more or whatever, but that's not the case. So with that said, I'm against this development agreement, but if we could limit 5 or more at a time, I would be in favor of it, but that's not what's happening. So majority of the people have told me they're not in favor of this. So, and they also mentioned that we're not following some of our own bylaws, so land use bylaws. So with that said, I'll vote against it at this time, but I'm on the fence. There was 2 presentations here done, very informative, and looking forward, it's a hard decision, but I have to vote one way or the other. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors wish to enter the debate and explain their position with respect to what their final vote will be? Councillor Windsor. The reason I put it in those terms, Councillor Windsor, if I could just interrupt you for a second, is that it's important for the rest of us around the table, if any councillor has a firm and supportable position on this, that they can convince other councillors to their point of view. So apologies for that expansion. Councillor Windsor, go ahead.
No problem. I think we're missing a piece of information here, and I'd like to go back maybe and ask for reconsideration by you, the chair, as to, because we came right from a public hearing into air, and we did not really have an opportunity to maybe ask some very good questions of the staff, because that was questions of clarification to some degree, and the notion of a step development, phase development was not really on the table then. But I think the question that the deputy mayor asked maybe might clarify things. If staff could expound on the question as to whether the development agreement could be amended to say maximum development for the first X years would be 10 cabins and pending certain conditions, I presume conditions would have to be there, that then the development for the additional 10 can happen. I like, to me, that was, if that's a big issue, and it seems to be a big issue here, it was mentioned by one of our presenters. It's foundational to a position that our councillor for the district is taking, and our deputy mayor was keen on understanding that point. So I don't know how we can deal with this, Mayor, if we don't allow a staff explanation as to how that might or might not work. I'd like to hear the discussion. I'd like to hear the comments. If it's not permitted, then we know what we're against. And if it is, then maybe there's an option there that shows continuance of working to mutual solution. Generally, I'm trying to figure out, in my view, was anything presented this evening that says we're breaking our own rules? I don't think that we would be by approving this. That the approval, in my view, would be in line with our policy and municipal planning strategy. So on that basis, I'm in agreement. But if there's something that is that mediates the difference there that would be acceptable to all parties, then it would be nice to know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I reiterate my previous comments and ruling, and I'll give you a few supplementary reasons for it. First of all, we have a public hearing in order to hear from the public their points of view. With regard to the presenter of the file, we had opportunities to query the presenter on questions of clarification. That could have been one of the questions, and it wasn't asked. We had presentations from at least 2 individuals, and we had opportunities to ask questions of clarification. And we did. And we have now before us a motion that if your suggestion were to be permitted and a staff person was to rise and say, well, yes, we can consider that, then that is in effect turning down the motion and turning down the application, because it involves a whole new negotiation between the proposed developer and the municipality. If some councillor wishes to defer this to another day for approval, in the hope that there might be some renegotiation available, then I suppose you could do that. But otherwise, you're either going to have to approve it or turn it down with reasons. Again, my rulings as chair are always appealable. I have 2 lights on. Perhaps we'll go to those, and then if anything changes, you can let me know. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to vote in favor of this, hopefully this evening. With all due respect to my colleagues here in council, this has been before us on many occasions. There was a public information meeting. It was before planning advisory. It was on first reading here. We've had a public meeting, and now it's before us yet again. So I think we've had more than enough opportunity to ask our questions, to listen to the public, to listen to the applicant, and if our questions weren't asked, then they weren't answered. As far as some of the comments made by some of the other councillors, where the number of people around the lake will increase by 60 to 100 people or 120 people, based on the applicant's presentation this evening, the largest unit they're going to have would maybe fit 4 or 5. So at 19, that doesn't hit 120 people. So I'm not sure where those numbers come from. I understand the concerns about the lake water quality, but that falls directly within the purview of the Department of Environment for the province, and for them to monitor that. Unfortunately, we're in a time where climate change is a very real issue. Low water in lakes. I think one of the presenters said that the water in the lake this year was so low they couldn't get to their docks with their boats. And low water and warm water causes algae bloom. It doesn't necessarily mean it's being put there by excessive amounts of people. So I'm in favor of this, and I will vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hurtle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to be voting in favor of this. I'm confident, based on the staff report and presentation from the applicant, that all the concerns will be mitigated, and especially with some of the compromises being enacted, and with all the factors that we can consider as council. I believe this needs to be approved, and it should be approved. I appreciate the concern from the residents, but given what we are able to consider as council and our policies, that this squarely fits within our policies, and we are required to approve this. And I would encourage my colleagues to take up my position. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to add one thing. Probably at least 50% of the people, residents and cottage owners at this lake, reached out to me. And I can't recall one of them against this development, but they had concerns about the size of the development going forward. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor.
Well, I will make a motion to amend with the risk that it be out of order. And I would like to amend the amount of cottages to be 10, recognizing that a development agreement can be reopened, I think, relatively soon after it's passed, so that it's not closing the door completely to the number of cottages proposed. But if it is out of order, then I guess that is something I will have to reconcile in my own decision making, but I would like to make that amendment.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And as you can appreciate, as often the chair of these meetings, unpopular decisions have to be made by the chair. The amendment is contrary to the motion, and therefore it's not in order. In order to accomplish what I hear 2 or 3 saying, it would be much more advisable and in order if there was a motion to table this matter, to refer to staff and bring back at a definite future meeting date. So I leave that with you for consideration, and I'll look to anyone else who wishes to speak at the present time before I take such a motion. Councillor Windsor again.
I just have a question. What does that do to the process if we defer tonight?
Well, if the recommendation comes back in any other form, then the whole you'd have to go back to square one on
Right.
advertising,
Yeah.
public hearing, and
Yeah.
all the rest of the procedure associated with such things.
Yeah, and I don't think that's reasonable in the circumstances from my perspective. Thank you.
Any other comments from council? Councillor Hurtle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and playing off some of the points that councillor across the table has made. This has come before council a number of times. So I believe if we're looking at it at this 11th hour to make some major adjustments that are outside the scope of the development agreement, we are not doing ourselves a service in demonstrating the competency of our own council. So we should consider moving forward and making a positive vote in this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? Okay. If I could just comment on a couple of things. Firstly, on the technical issue, to attempt to amend is in fact defeating the motion, because you cannot force the developer or the proponent to go back and renegotiate the matter. You can turn it down, and conceivably the proponent can come back with another proposal that is different than this and is in compliance with the opinions that the proponent has heard expressed. Or you can pass it, which is contrary to what the opponent has expressed. For my own part, I have great respect for what I've heard from each of the presenters on this item. I have read every email that's been sent and presented. I understand the concerns, whether real or imagined. It's a concern. I look at the proponent here. It's a concern for people who are renting around the lake to come and oppose such an application because they don't want to offend you. One of them has shown some incredible spine in actually coming here and making his presentation, so I hope there's no suffering associated with that. I'm sure there won't be. All the concerns that have been expressed both orally here today and in the emails that I have read speculate that perhaps fewer cottages would or glamping sites would be appropriate. Really, there's no evidence before us that any number is a magic number. And it's true, the comments that have been made, I agree with, that we have had issues associated with algae blooms across the municipal lakes within our jurisdiction. The municipality owns property at Aylesford Lake that we've had to close, not because of an algae bloom necessarily, but simply because the water got warm and low and the ducks polluted the beach. Those incidents will happen, I fear, perhaps more and more, although I'm not a climate change specialist either. With regard to the environmental issues, those are my comments. With regard to the increase in population on the lake, and whether or not that is detrimental to the lake water quality, I don't accept that argument because I've observed the increases in populations on all of the lakes, some of which are not much different in size than this one, also in other municipalities. Increases in population don't seem to be a problem other than the issues that have been referred to as potential noise, because obviously the sound travels across water, whether you're on the ocean or whether you're on, and you've got neighbors beside you, or whether you're on lakes. or whether there's someone in the middle of the lake in a boat. That sound will travel. And so there has to be some concern about that and some respect given by the persons who are using the lake, and one would hope that the rules of any such establishment as is being proposed here would include cautions in that regard. I'm satisfied that the staff of the municipality have addressed all the concerns that we are required to address. The fact that the volunteers that we look to gather lake water quality samples and that we then submit to testing procedures in the appropriate laboratories get held up and are often a year or two behind, I don't think is a factor. These issues have been ongoing, and generally speaking, in our lakes, the water quality is quite good. Those are my comments. My inclination is to vote in favor of the motion unless my colleagues convince me otherwise. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Richard. I just wanted to note that careful consideration of all perspectives and information received, even at the 11th hour, which has been noted by my colleagues. But at the 11th hour is unfortunately when our public hearings are held, which was this evening. So when we get information in the public hearing, we are allowed to change our minds and be prompted to ask further questions.
Point of order is being called.
Just in regular debate, no counselor shall speak more than twice on any motion to explain a misconception of his, or unless to explain a misconception of his or her remarks.
The counselor's point of order is upheld simply because those are our rules. The fact that the chair has been lax in allowing those rules to be bent doesn't help us in this instance, I'm afraid, Deputy Mayor.
That's fine. Thank you.
Anyone wish to speak who hasn't spoken twice? Do the councillors need time to deliberate amongst themselves? Or would you wish to share with us?
Councillor Windsor was just clarifying the point of order.
Okay. Questions being called. All those in favor or otherwise of the motion, please vote now. The motion is passed 5-4, 3 against. Thank you. Thank you for the healthy debate. I appreciate everyone's point of view on this, and I assure you that these decisions are not easy ones. Those involved in the proceeding, when these matters are dealt with, then you've been informed by staff of the procedure that follows this concerning advertising and so on, and appeal periods. If you wish to leave us now and not stay for the next 2.5 hours, you're certainly free to do so. Item 6C, application to rezone portions of properties in Garland. Councillor Armstrong.
The Municipal Council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding the rezoning of lands on Hiltz Road in Garland from the rural mixed-use A2 zone to the rural industrial M3 zone, as shown in Appendix A of the report dated December 13, 2022. I so move.
Seconder for the motion. Seconded by Councillor Harding. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. That's passed unanimously. Thank you. And the next one, Councillor?
That municipal council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding the application to rezone 1070 Center Avenue, PID 55109-250 Greenwood from the mixed commercial residential C3 zone to the residential 1 and 2 unit R2 zone. Wow, it's late. And the residential, okay.
Yeah, we'll just back that
take a
up,
pause here.
if I may. That municipal council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding the application to rezone 1070 Central Avenue, PID 55109-250 Greenwood from the mixed commercial residential C3 zone, the residential 1 and 2 unit R2 zone, and the residential multi-unit R3 zone to the general commercial C1 zone as described in Appendix D of the report dated December 13th, 2022.
Thank you. I so move.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Windsor. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. That's unanimously passed. Thank you. And Councillor Armstrong, the date for the next public hearing?
I think we're going to be making a decision later in this meeting as to when our next council meeting is, whether it be February 7th or February 14th, but the public hearing will precede that at 6 p.m.
Whichever of those two dates we choose before the end of this evening.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for those presentations. Moving on to item 7, administration. Amendments to policy admin 01020, records for information management adoption. Is this coming from Committee of the Whole? No? So it's being proposed that Municipal Council adopt amendments to policy admin 01020, records for information management as attached to the January 3rd, 2023 Council agenda. Is anyone presenting on that, or shall we just take it as attached? Looking to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify, this was initially before Committee of the Whole, then it went to a council meeting to provide 7 days' notice. I believe that was a December council meeting. So it is now before council to adopt the amendments.
Thanks for the clarification, Madam Clerk. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. I'm sorry, Madam Clerk. Not moved?
It was not moved and seconded yet, Mr. Mayor.
It's moved by Councillor Harding, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. That's unanimous. Thank you. Moving to item B, rescheduling of February 7th, 2023 Council. So we had a brief comment with regard to that. Who's going to give input on that particular item? Shall I? Madam Clerk?
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify, we have 4 councillors attending an FCM Sustainable Communities Conference in Ottawa, and that is held February the 7th to the 10th. And February 7th is the date of our next regular council meeting. So staff are proposing moving the council meeting to February the 14th, so a week later. Also a Tuesday, and that would be at 6 p.m. And we would then also move the public hearing to that date.
Okay, thank you. It would be risky of us, although we could have a meeting, there would only be 5 councillors, and if one was ill, we wouldn't have a quorum. So Councillor Armstrong has moved the motion that we reschedule the February 14th, or the February 7th meeting rather, to February 14th due to the absence of 4 councillors at FCM. Do I have a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Allen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. That's unanimously passed. Thank you. So that means that the next public hearing will also be on February the 14th, 2023. Moving to item 8, Budget and Finance Committee recommendation, and I'm going to the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, Councillor Hurtle, for that item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as per the December 13th Budget and Finance Committee meeting, the budget timeline was brought to us, as you'll find on page 29 of the Budget and Finance agenda, and attached to as a report here. And the recommendation is that Municipal Council approve the fiscal 2023-24 budget timeline as attached to the December 13th, 2022 request for decision. And I so move.
Seconder, please. Seconded by Councillor Allen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. While we're waiting for the result of that vote, I remind Council that we, after adjournment of this meeting, will be staying for a closed session, which should not take too long. That motion is passed unanimously. Thank you. Moving to item 9, Committee of the Whole recommendations. 9A, exception to tendering for Panasonic Toughbooks. It's been recommended by Committee of the Whole that Council receive the briefing on the exception to tendering for Panasonic Toughbooks, which is dated December 20th, 2022 as information. Do I have a mover of that motion? Moved by the Deputy Mayor. Seconder, Councillor Meisner. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. That motion's passed unanimously. Thank you. And moving to item 9B, the traffic management study for Greenwich. It's been recommended by Committee of the Whole that Municipal Council authorize the Mayor to send a letter to the Minister of Public Works requesting the joint undertaking of a transportation study that looks at the motorized, pedestrian, and active transportation issues and conflicts throughout Greenwich and develop strategies and plans to remedy these matters with responsibilities and costs to be determined for the parties as agreed. Mover of the motion, Councillor Harding. Seconder, Councillor Windsor. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. That's approved unanimously. Thank you. Moving to item 10, Regional Sewer Committee recommendation of December 13th, 2022. I'm looking to Councillor Windsor as the chair of the Regional Sewer Committee to present that item.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is something that staff and the committee has been struggling with, but we found a way forward with the partners. And this motion is to the effect that the cost associated with the consulting engagement described in the December 15, 2022 request for decision be funded in whole or in part from the 2022-23 operating surplus, or failing sufficient surplus be recovered through the 2022-23 deficit billings to the partners, contingent upon regional partners' approval.
You move the motion,
And I so move.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Allen. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. That's approved unanimously. Thank you. We have one item of correspondence from the Valley Wildcats dated December 22nd, 22, thanking us for our financial contribution to the Valley Wildcats in 2022. Do I have a motion to receive the correspondence? Moved by Councillor Hurdle, seconded by Councillor Allen. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. That's approved unanimously. Thank you. Is there any other business to come before council? Before we adjourn and go in camera? Councillor Windsor.
Yeah, I just, very quickly, I put in a sewer committee report, but it was not timely on my part, and with the Christmas season and folks being away, it wasn't included. But I would just briefly note that with respect to the sewer committee, that motion that we just passed is dealing with that contract to further remove sludge from cell 1. The whole objective, as you recall, last summer, spring and summer, and into the fall, was quite an issue with the odors. So there's been a lot of work done to invest in capital, but the other part is to also to engage a third-party consultant to review operations and maintenance procedures across the board and how we're doing things, and further to also look then at how the implementation or the implementation can be made effective through making sure that we've got bylaws with the parties, minus PepsiCo, of course, to ensure enforcement and to be able to identify where problems are coming from, be able to deal with those parties, and if necessary, to be able to take enforcement procedures. So that contract will be putting in place a framework to be able to do all of those things. I just thought I'd highlight those things because it is a significant issue, and hopefully we will get to a point where there's little to no complaints. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Windsor. Any questions of Councillor Windsor on his report? Councillor Windsor, I take it that the Regional Sewer Committee hasn't yet had an opportunity to consider the financial matter we dealt with in the previous motion.
Yeah, this has all been before the Regional Sewer Committee.
So they've approved it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
They've approved it as it is written there.
All right, thank you. Any other business? No public present at the present time, so I'm looking for, I'm asking the CAO first, Mr. CAO, whether or not there's any item that you intend to raise in camera that will require us to come out back into council for a motion.
I don't anticipate requiring any motion, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Then I'm looking for a motion to adjourn this meeting and move into an in-camera session. Moved by Councillor Windsor, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All those in favor? I might say we're not off the air yet. I did have a comment if we're not off the air yet. Not yet. I just wanted to congratulate Council for the manner in which they conduct themselves during public hearings and subsequent debate on matters that come before us as a result of public hearings. It's extremely difficult given all the varied opinions and balancing all of those with the opinions of staff and the negotiations that staff have entered into in order to make the best arrangement possible and ensure that these matters are in compliance with our own regulations and those of the province and other individuals. So having said that, then we can go off the air. Thanks.